The state of Illinois is a bright, bright, bright blue state, right? In every one of the previous 6 presidential elections, going back to 1992, Illinois voted handily for the Democratic candidate for president. In last year's presidential election, President Obama won in his home state of Illinois by 17 points. And that does not mean there are no Republican areas and no Republican members of Congress in Illinois. There are plenty of conservative parts of the state, but statewide, Illinois is very blue, which makes it all the more amazing that Illinois has a senator. And of course, senators are elected statewide. Illinois has a senator who is a Republican. Senator Mark Kirk was elected to fill the seat that was once held by President Obama. After the Rod Blagojevich scandal of the governor essentially trying to sell that seat, the scandal that ultimately put Governor Blagojevich in prison, Republican Mark Kirk is the man who eventually got that seat. Senator Kirk is probably best known for the major health challenges that he has survived since becoming a senator. Senator Kirk suffered a major stroke in January 2012. It took him an entire year to recover enough to relearn how to walk. You might remember this very moving, dramatic footage of him returning to work for the first time, walking with great difficulty up the Capitol steps, where he was greeted by Vice President Joe Biden and his fellow senator from Illinois, Dick Durbin, and by his friend, West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin. But while Senator Mark Kirk has been dealing with the physical rigors of coming back from that devastating stroke, he has also been fully functional as a senator. And he's been very interesting as a senator because Mark Kirk is turning out to be not a very predictable guy. He is a conservative in a lot of the traditional senses. He's anti-regulation, an anti-tax guy. He's a hawk on foreign policy. He's supported privatizing Social Security. But he also sometimes takes positions where it's just Senator Mark Kirk and the Democrats, or it's just Senator Mark Kirk and a handful of other Republicans who are brave enough to defy their party and side with the Democrats. Like, for example, on the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, Senator Kirk was not just one of the 10 Republicans who crossed party lines in order to support that anti-discrimination measure. He was a co-sponsor of the legislation. His very first speech on the floor of the Senate, once he came back after having had a stroke, was speaking in favor of that Non-Discrimination Act. He is in the thumbs up column on the issue of gay rights and non-discrimination. And a really, really interesting thing happened in the last couple of days involving Senator Mark Kirk's office. In his home state of Illinois, there is a group called the World Congress of Families. They're headquartered in Rockford, Illinois. And the World Congress of Families is not just an anti-gay group. They're not a run-of-the-mill anti-gay group. They are a super mega double Dutch, really emphatically anti-gay group. When Russia started passing all of its recent anti-gay legislation that has alarmed the whole world about Russia taking this stark anti-gay turn right before they host the Winter Olympics, it was the World Congress of Families in Rockford, Illinois, that was not just applauding what Russia was doing. They started sending American anti-gay activists to go over to Moscow to advise Russia on how to improve their anti-gay legislation, to praise Russia for what they were doing, to encourage them to do more. As a reward or a sign of support for how anti-gay Russia has become, the World Congress of Families is planning on holding an international summit next year at the Kremlin, specifically because they are so psyched that Russia hates gays so much more than they used to. So the World Congress of Families is based in Illinois, in Mark Kirk's home state. And apparently, if you're an interest group of some kind and your group would like to hold a meeting in one of the rooms at the U.S. Capitol, you just call up one of your home state senators and ask if they will book the room for you. I didn't think I knew that it happened this way, but apparently this is a very common practice. And it's the kind of thing that happens frequently enough that it's just handled at the staff level as a relatively routine matter. And so, Mark Kirk's office got the call. Okay, you're the World Congress of Families? Okay, that's a fairly anodyne-sounding name. They called Senator Kirk's office. Through his staff, they booked meeting space at the United States Capitol for today. The meeting they were planning on holding in the Capitol was specifically to praise how anti-gay Russia has become and to strategize for how to get that kind of Russian-style anti-gay stuff going on over here. How to bring anti-gay policies from places like Russia, also, say, Uganda, Other places that are real success stories for tormenting and abusing their gay populations. How can we use those examples to inspire similar good work for our country here in Washington, D.C.? That was the subject of the meeting. Senator Kirk's office had initially booked them that room for that meeting in the U.S. Capitol. But then they realized who this group was. The Google befell them. The senator's staff moved, once they realized who these guys were, the senator's staff, on their own recognizance, moved to unhelp this group, to rescind the offer of booking this room for them at the U.S. Capitol. They called the group and told them it could not happen. So this is interesting, right? I mean, this is a home state group, and this is a Republican senator. But Senator Kirk is not like that on these issues, and his office could not have been clearer about this issue once they realized who this group was and what was going on. His office spoke with BuzzFeed about this whole kerfuffle last night. BuzzFeed broke the story. Lester Fetter there did. The statement from Mark Kirk's office was very blunt and very direct. Quote, Senator Kirk does not affiliate with groups that discriminate. Well, the specific group that does discriminate here, which Senator Kirk uninvited from the Capitol, they were very, very angry about him uninviting them from the Capitol. They said, quote, obviously, Senator Kirk does not care about families and children and freedom. And he has chosen to side with the policies of decline and death and disease promoted by these sexual radicals. Shame on you, Senator Mark Kirk, for allowing vocal radical sexual minorities to drown out the voices of the natural family. One of the anti-gay activists who was due to speak at the meeting today went even further and called Senator Kirk a coward for this decision. A coward. So that all went down last night. BuzzFeed broke the story, got the statement from Senator Kirk's office. The group was uninvited. That was all last night. Today, that group, that anti-gay group who called Senator Mark Kirk a coward and everything, they did have their meeting at the U.S. Capitol. Because even though Mark Kirk rescinded his offer to set up a room for them when he realized who they were, another congressional Republican decided to intervene, decided to help this group get another room so they could still have that meeting. And the member of Congress who did that is House Speaker John Boehner. What? I expected it to be like maybe, I don't know, Louis Gohmert or Michelle Bachmann, the ghost of Jesse Helms, maybe? But the actual Speaker of the House, John Boehner, stepped up personally to make sure that that anti-gay group was well taken care of today at the United States Capitol. Your tax dollars at work. He's third in line to the presidency. What, Fred Phelps and the Westboro Baptist Church didn't need to use that room at that time? We didn't have any extra space for them? John Boehner also made news this week by repeating his insistence that he will not allow the Employment Non-Discrimination Act to come up for a vote in the House. This is that bill about employment discrimination that Mark Kirk co-sponsored. Right now, legally, you can't discriminate in employment in this country on the basis of race, gender, age, religion, national origin, disability, or genetic information. ENDA, the non-discrimination bill, that's the bill that would add sexual orientation and gender identity to that list of things on which list of bases on which you cannot discriminate. Right now, in the majority of American states, if your boss hears that you're gay or decides that he or she thinks that you're gay, your boss can fire you on the spot for that reason and that reason alone, and you have no legal recourse in a majority of American states. The Senate overwhelmingly passed a bill to fix that, with every Democrat voting in favor of it, and with 10 Republican senators, including Mark Kirk, crossing the aisle to defeat the Republican Party's filibuster against it. They voted for it to become law. It got a big vote, 64 yes votes. But it never will become law, as long as John Boehner will not allow it to be voted on in the House, and he says that that is his decision. If that bill did come up for a vote in the House, it would almost certainly pass. It is a really popular thing. Not only did it get 64 votes in the U.S. Senate, look at the public polling on this. Overall, 73% of Americans favor passing a law protecting gay people against workplace discrimination. It's favored by a huge proportion of Democrats and a huge proportion of independents, and also by a really big proportion of Republicans. 60% of Republican voters support this. A big, bright, clear majority of Republican voters wants our country to have a law like this. But Republicans in Congress won't let it happen. And it turns out that that exact dynamic holds on a bunch of things right now in Washington. John Boehner, again this week, insisted that he would also not allow a vote on immigration reform. And just like the non-discrimination bill, immigration reform is super, super, super popular. It passed the United States Senate with 14 Republican senators crossing the aisle to vote with the Democrats on it. It beat the Republican filibuster handily. That's a huge vote in the Senate for immigration reform, 68 votes. That shows you how non-controversial and middle of the road that bill was. They had to make it that non-controversial and middle of the road so it could pass with a 2-to-1 margin. I mean, overall, huge majorities of Americans support immigration reform. 87% support reforming immigration and allowing a pathway to citizenship for immigrants who are here illegally. Democrats, independents, and Republicans are virtually identical in their huge, look at that, overwhelming support for that big reform. There was just new polling specifically in Republican swing districts. This was a new poll across 20 districts where Republicans are the representatives from those districts. And 76% of the people in those districts favor the pathway to citizenship, which is supposedly the most controversial part of immigration reform. So the president surely wants it. The Senate wants it. Democrats in Congress want it. Democratic voters want it. Independent voters want it. And Republican voters want it. Who doesn't want it? Oh, you guys. The only people who do not want it are John Boehner and presumably some other House Republicans. But they're against everybody else in the country. They are completely against public opinion on this issue, including the public opinion of Republicans. They're also completely against public opinion on the issue of the minimum wage. Overall, the number of people who say they want to raise the minimum wage is 76%. Support for the minimum wage is massive among Democrats and independents and among Republicans. But even though their own voters support it, Republicans in Congress will not let it happen. On background checks for guns, right? Background checks for guns are supported by 81% of Americans, broadly speaking. Background checks had huge support among Democrats, among independents, and look, among Republicans. Expanded background checks for gun purchases are supported by gun owners. Expanded background checks are supported by NRA members. But these guys in Congress, the Republicans in Congress, say no. Remember the Buffett rule that said billionaires shouldn't pay lower tax rates than their secretaries? Democrats support that, independents support that, Republicans support that. It's just the Republicans in Congress who say no, even though their own voters like the idea. I raised the issue of the Buffett rule because supposedly after the government shutdown, remember what we were going to start working on? We were going to start working on a grand bargain. What's our tax policy going to be? What's our budget going to be? It's all supposed to be about debating policy measures, like, for example, the Buffett rule, which is very, very popular even among Republican voters. But Republicans in Congress will not allow an issue like that to even be voted on, even though their own voters want it. And when you start looking at this, when you start looking at these public opinion polls on issue after issue after issue after issue, this is what is called a pattern. In representative democracy, if you are in elected office and you pursue policies that are very unpopular, and you block policies that are very popular, something is supposed to happen to you. It's like the elephant in the elephant's room. Republican policy ideas, both in terms of what they like, but especially what they don't like. Republican policy ideas are very, 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 very strongly at odds with the views of the American people, with even most Republican voters. They believe they have one winning issue on health reform, where their opposition to the president's health reform law is closer to public opinion on that issue, which of course is still in flux. They think it's closer on that issue than it is on every other major policy issue before the country right now, where they stand against the rule of the public and even the rule of their own voters. Why don't they pay a higher cost for that? And why haven't Democrats figured out a way to make them pay a higher cost from that?